Austin in Texas. That was actually the first time.
Was cloned in 1997.
What I thought I would talk about is the same subject that I talked about 2 days before getting the Nobel Prize in Stockholm on December 8th, 2005. Every person who gets the prize has to give a lecture. It's called a Nobel lecture, and there's a jury sitting there, and they listen to the lecture, and then they decide, well, is this good enough for the prize or not? And if it's not good enough, you don't get the prize. So that is what I did on December 8th, a little over a year ago. And I thought I would talk about the same thing tonight. The only thing, the title of that talk was War and Peace in the Middle East. I think the title of tonight's talk is Game Theory in the Middle East. Is that right? Anyway, it's the same thing. We're going to talk about war and peace in the Middle East. And what I spoke about in Stockholm was not war and peace in the Middle East, but just war and peace, because I was specifically, I did not want to talk about the Middle East over there because it's it's a subject that might put people's back up a little bit, and I wanted war and peace. I wanted to talk about war and peace, but I didn't want war and peace right there in Stockholm. So let's get started on that. Wars and other conflicts are among the main sources of human misery. Thus begins the announcement of the 2005 Prize in Economic Sciences in memory of Alfred Nobel, and it was awarded for game theory analysis of conflict and cooperation. The first word there is war, the first word in the announcement. So it's appropriate to devote this lecture to one of the most pressing and profound issues that confront humanity, that of war and peace. I'd like to suggest that we should perhaps change direction in our efforts to bring about world peace. Up to now, all the effort has been put into resolving specific conflicts: India, Pakistan, North-South Ireland, various African wars, Balkan wars, Russia, Chechnya, Israel, Arab also. I'd like to suggest that we should shift emphasis and study war in general. Let me make a comparison. There are two approaches to cancer. One is clinical. You have, say, God forbid, breast cancer. What should you do? Surgery, radiation, chemotherapy? How much radiation? Which chemotherapy? The answers are based on clinical tests, simply on what works best. You treat each case on its own, using your best information. And your aim is to cure the disease or to ameliorate it in the specific patient before you. And there's another approach. You don't do surgery, you don't do radiation, you don't do chemotherapy, you don't look at statistics, you don't look at the patient. There is no patient. You just try to understand what happens in a cancerous cell. What is the process like? Don't try to cure it, just try to understand it. You work with mice, not people, and you try to make them sick, not to cure them. Louis Pasteur was a physician. It was important to him to treat people, to cure them. But Robert Koch was not a physician. He did not try to cure people. He just wanted to know how infectious disease works. And eventually, his work became tremendously important in treating and curing infectious disease. Koch is the man who discovered the connection between bacteria and disease. War has been with us ever since the dawn of civilization. Nothing has been more constant in history than war. It's a phenomenon. It's not a series of isolated events. In fact, until a very short time ago on the horizon of history, war was considered something honorable, something to strive for, yes. The efforts to resolve specific conflicts are certainly laudable, and sometimes they really bear fruit. But there's also another way of going about it, perhaps more effective. Studying war as a general phenomenon, studying its general defining characteristics, what the common denominators are and what the differences are, historically, sociologically, psychologically, and yes, rationally. Why does rational man go to war? What do I mean by rationality? It is this. A person's behavior is rational if it is in his best interests given his information. Okay, let's say that again because it's a definition of central importance. I don't mean that a person is rational if he knows how to add or if he knows how to reason logically. That's not my definition of rationality. And it's not the definition of rationality that's used in game theory or in economics. I'll repeat my definition, our definition. A person's behavior is rational if it is in his best interests to the best of his knowledge, given his information. So if it advances his goals, then I call it rational. With this definition, can war be rational? Unfortunately, the answer is yes, it can be. In one of the greatest speeches of all time, the 16th President of the United States, Abraham Lincoln, said about the American Civil War, both parties deprecated war, but one would make war rather than let the nation survive, and the other would accept war rather than let it perish. And the war came. It's a big mistake to say that war is irrational. We take all the ills of the world, wars, strikes, racial discrimination, and dismiss them by calling them irrational. They're not irrational. Though it hurts, they're often rational. If war is rational, once we understand that it is, we can at least somehow address the problem. If we simply dismiss it as irrational, we cannot address the problem. Many years ago, I was present at a meeting of students of Yale University. Jim Tobin, who was a professor at Yale at that time and later got the Nobel Prize, was also there. One question that came up was, can one sum up economics in one word? Tobin's answer was yes. The word is incentives. Economics is all about incentives. So what I'd like to do is an economic analysis of war. Now, this does not mean what it sounds like. I'm not talking about how to finance a war, and I'm not talking about how to rebuild after a war, or anything like that. I'm talking about the incentives that lead to war and about building incentives that prevent war. Let me give an example. Economics teaches us that things are not always as they appear. For example, suppose you want to raise revenue from taxes. To do that, obviously, you should raise the tax rates, right? To raise revenue, get more money you should raise the rates, right? No, wrong. You might want to lower the tax rates to give people an incentive to work, or to reduce avoidance and evasion, or to heat up the economy, or for many other reasons. That's just one example. There are thousands like it. An economy is a game, and in a game the incentives of the players interact in complex ways and lead to surprising, often counterintuitive results. But as it turns out, the economy and the world really work that way. So, let's analyze war. An example in the spirit of the previous item is this. You want to prevent war. To do that, obviously, you should disarm. Lower the level of armaments. Right? No, wrong. You might want to do the exact opposite. In the long years of the Cold War between the United States and the Soviet Union, what prevented hot war was that bombers carrying nuclear weapons were in the air 24 hours a day, 365 days a year. Disarming would have led to war. So the bottom line is that we should start studying war for its own sake. Try to understand what makes it happen. Once we understand what makes it happen, then we can deal with it, and we can be led eventually, perhaps, to peace. And now I'd like to discuss some of my own basic contributions, some of those that were cited by the prize committee. Specifically, repeated games and how they relate to war and to other conflicts like strikes, and indeed to all games. And what I mean by a game is an interactive situation. Repeated games model long-term interaction. The theory of repeated games is able to account for phenomena such as altruism, cooperation, trust, loyalty, revenge, threats, even self-destructive threats, phenomena that may at first seem irrational, in terms of the definition of rationality that we stated a few minutes ago. Namely, that rational behavior means self-interested behavior. Behavior that is calculated to achieve your goals and has a good chance of doing so. And the fundamental insight is that repetition, long-term interaction, enables cooperation and indeed fosters cooperation. If you interact with another party again and again, day in and day out, year in and year out, you are much more liable to develop cooperative modes of behavior than if you interact on a one-time basis. Actually, that's pretty obvious. If I had been on the prize committee, I would have been opposed to giving the prize to the guy who thought this up. Fortunately, I was not on the committee. Suppose somebody comes to your door and wants to sell you something. And suppose he doesn't come from a company that you ever heard of. He does not come from a reputable company. You'll think twice about buying the merchandise he's selling you. Why? Well, because it's clear that you'll never see him again. What happens if he sells you shoddy merchandise? You have no place to go. But if there's somebody who has a store in your neighborhood, he doesn't come to your door, you've seen him before, you'll see him again, you'll go and you'll buy from him because, why? Because he wants to do business with you tomorrow as well. And he did business with you yesterday. And he knows that when he sells you shoddy merchandise, then you will not come back to him. And it's as simple as that. You have an incentive to cooperate with him, and he has an incentive to cooperate with you. And what is creating those incentives is something that doesn't sound very nice, but it's God's honest truth. What is creating the cooperation is the threat of punishment, that you won't go to him again. He's not going to sell you shoddy merchandise if you have a long-term interaction. If he's around, if he's identifiable, if he opens a store. The threat, what's creating the cooperation? It's the threat of punishment. It doesn't sound nice, but that's how it is. Just like those bombers in the air with nuclear weapons. The threat of punishment was creating the cooperation. It's what enabled the Cold War to continue and end cold, not hot. So what enables cooperation is punishment, not actual punishment, but potential punishment. So in brief, long-term interaction fosters cooperation because the benefits accruing from long-term repeated cooperative behavior exceed the gains from one-time selfish behavior. Selfish behavior that will be punished if it's carried out. That's the basic story. That's why they gave me the Nobel Prize. There is a caveat that's needed to make this work. And the caveat is what we call, in technical language, a low interest rate or a low discount rate. In less technical language, it's that the players must not be too impatient. They must be patient. They must be interested mainly in the future, because it's the future that makes this work. It's the threat of future punishment that makes people cooperate now. If you are impatient, then the future is less important to you, and the whole mechanism breaks down. If you insist on peace now, you may never get peace. But if you're willing to wait, then you may get peace now. This is one of those apparent contradictions that are characteristic of much of economic theory and indeed of science in general. Shortly before coming to Stockholm to receive the prize, I learned that global warming may lead to a cooling of Europe, because it may shift the direction of the Gulf Stream. And as we all know, it's the Gulf Stream that keeps Europe moderately warm. Europe is much warmer than the interior of the United States. Global warming may lead to a cooler Europe. In fact, we had a very cool, very, very pleasant spring in Israel this year. Very pleasant. It's still cool. The beginning of June is still cool. Usually it's burning hot by this time. Well, maybe it's because of global warming. Could be. So global warming may lead to a cooler Europe, and raising tax rates may lead to lower tax revenues. Okay? A contradiction, an apparent contradiction, but that's the truth. Disarming may lead to war, and wanting peace now may lead to never getting peace. The Arabs in the Middle East are now, up to now I've been talking about war and peace, now we'll talk about the Middle East. And we'll connect the things. The Arabs in the Middle East do not suffer from impatience. You know, I was in Jordan a couple of weeks ago, and we went around, we had an Israeli guide, and we went around. One of the things he showed, he was going to show us Jordan as it applies to Jews, Jewish Jordan, okay? And he showed us, it was a beautiful trip. He showed us a lot of places from the Tanakh, from the First Temple period, the Second Temple period. And then he showed us a Crusader castle. And he asked us, what does this have to do with Jews? Crusaders? Okay, we know that the Crusaders on their way to the Holy Land butchered the Jews in Europe. Okay, that's a Jewish connection. But what's a Crusader castle in Jordan, what does that have to do with the Jews? And the answer is very simple. We, the Arabs, think are the Crusaders. The Crusaders came in the early 12th century, and they stayed in the Holy Land for 90 years, and then they were driven out by the Arabs. So the Arabs say, okay, the Jews came here, they'll stay here 50, 60 years, 100 years, maybe up to 150 years. But then we will drive them out. We have time. We had time with the Crusaders. We have time with the Jews also. They're not in a hurry. They're not impatient. We're in a hurry. We are impatient. We do intend to stay here, but we're impatient. And that impatience is going to postpone the war. Postpone the peace. It's going to lead towards, going to prolong the war. We've been fighting over here in the Middle East. We have been fighting for over 80 years, and there's no end in sight. We shout peace, peace all the time. We make all kinds of gestures. We expel our own people from their homes. We expel thousands of people from their homes because somehow we want peace now, and we think that doing that will lead to peace now. But it doesn't. Patience is what is needed to foster cooperation. Patience, not a frenzied run for peace now, but patience. That is what is going to foster cooperation. And we set back the chances for peace by at least 10 to 20 years when we expelled our own people without even asking the Arabs, without any deal with them, from their homes just about 2 years ago, a little short of 2 years ago. That is one thing. And another thing is that in order to achieve peace, we have to, just like the airplanes in the Cold War, the airplanes that were ready to drop nuclear bombs on the other side at any moment. That is what kept the peace during the Cold War. That is what kept it from turning into a hot war. So what kept it from turning into a hot war? Being prepared for war. If you are prepared for war, then you will get peace. Yeah. It's a very old Roman proverb, I think, yes. If you want peace, prepare for war. And it was again repeated by Churchill, and it is a very elementary consequence of game theoretic thinking. Because if you are prepared for war, then the other side is not going to attack you. If you're not prepared for war, then the other side will attack you. This is something that has been proved again and again and again in history. I was in India a few months ago, and there again we had it. There was a threat. There was a beautiful place full of temples called Khajuraho in India. these temples were erected in memory of, in thankfulness to their gods for granting peace. And how was this peace achieved? This peace was achieved by mobilization. When there were threats, the kings of that era made deals with other kings. They mobilized, they amassed a big army, and as a result of that there was peace. But if you shout peace, peace all the time, you're not going to get peace. The longest period of peace in history is the Pax Romana. It lasted for about 400 years. And it was because, and the peace, I have no love for the Romans. They destroyed our temple. But they were ready for war. Yeah? And when the Jews rebelled, they were ready for it. And that is what kept the peace in the Pax Romana for hundreds of years, that they were ready for war. And the moment that they got too soft and were not ready for war, that's when they were destroyed. That's when the barbarians came and destroyed Rome. And that's another problem that we have over here in Israel. The problem is, see, to be prepared for war. What I said was, if you want peace, prepare for war. It's not what I say, by the way. It's very old. You don't need Yisrael Aumann for this. It's a very old insight, yeah. The preparation that I'm talking about is not only in material things, in guns, in tanks, in bomber and fighter planes, in helicopters. It's in that, but it's not only in that, and it's not even mainly in that. The main preparation for war has to be an emotional preparation. Rikshi, we say in Hebrew. It has to be in your head. You have to be prepared for losses. You have to be prepared for your men getting killed. And you have to be prepared for the enemy's people getting killed also. We're prepared for neither one. When 25 Arabs get killed, then our television is up in arms. Yeah. But we're also not prepared for our own men being killed. Yes, this is in the Second Lebanon War last summer. One of the main problems was that we did not want to go in with ground troops. Why? Because going in with ground troops mean that you may get killed. You didn't want to get killed. Yeah. But you can't fight a war without getting killed. All right? War is a bloody business. I'm sorry. And if you don't want to get killed, you have to be ready to be killed. If you don't want to get killed, you have to be ready to get killed. That's what will, prevent your getting killed and prevent you having to go to war at all. If you're ready to get killed, and if you're ready to kill the other side also. These things sound very, very unpleasant. But war is unpleasant, and we are in a very unpleasant situation. We're in a war that has lasted now for 80 years. Yes. It's not last summer's war, and it's not the Peace for Galilee operation, and it's not, these are just battles in the war. We have been in the war for 80 years. And this war is going to continue until we are ready to face it. When we are ready to face it, and when we sell our Arab cousins on the proposition that we are intending to stay here, then we may get peace. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is game theory in the Middle East.